Fox weather alert, dangerous weather stretching from coast to coast. A bomb cyclone and an Arctic blast combo bringing deadly temperatures and putting hundreds of millions at risk this holiday weekend. This is the Faulkner Focus. I am Molly Line in for Harris Today. The National Weather Service is calling it a once-in-a-generation storm, the potentially deadly front affecting nearly every single person in the United States. Blizzard-like snowfall already battering the Midwest. More than 200 million Americans are under winter weather warnings and advisories. The bitter cold hitting Montana, the Dakotas, Nebraska, Wyoming, and Colorado. Conditions across the country deteriorating fast. In Denver, temperatures dropping almost 50 degrees in the span of just a single hour. It is so cold in some places that frostbite can happen in just mere minutes. The situation so serious, the president spoke moments ago before a briefing from the National Weather Service and FEMA.
I encourage everyone, please heed the local warnings. Take this storm extremely seriously. And I don't know whether your bosses will let you, but if you all have travel plans, leave now.
If you have travel plans, that storm already throwing a massive wrench into those holiday travel plans across the country. A bit later, we'll check in with one of the busiest travel hubs in the country, Chicago's O'Hare International Airport. But first, Fox meteorologist Adam Klotz with what you need to know in the next few days. Adam, to you.
Hey, Molly. Yeah, well, a massive storm, as you set up right there. Kind of a couple parts of this system. The one we continue to look at is just that very heavy snow currently moving across the Plain State, lifting into the upper Midwest. Also, though, if you live along the East Coast, you could be talking about a lot of rainfall, really flooding. As this part of the storm lifts its way up the coast, you're going to see very heavy rain in D.C., running up to New York, eventually up towards Boston. But the backside of this system is where all that cold air is, and that is where we're seeing a whole lot of these winter weather alerts. Everything there in the orange, that is a blizzard warning. Winds up to 60 miles an hour, and not a ton of snow, maybe 4 inches, 6 inches in some of these places. But with all of that wind, it's going to be a complete whiteout. So driving is going to be incredibly difficult. And you see 100 million people or more under some sort of winter weather advisory, as this is just a massive system that's going to impact a whole lot of people. The feels like temperature, that's the wind plus the temperature. That is where it gets absolutely brutal as this air settles in across the country. And it is only going to stretch farther as we get into Friday and Saturday. But currently, there are places in the northern plains where it feels like negative 45 degrees. Earlier, I saw some negative 55 degrees, so it has been incredibly cold. This is only going to spread out, and more folks are going to be dealing with these just unbelievably cold temperatures. Wind chill alerts are currently stretched from the Texas border all the way to the Canadian border, and then stretching all the way over towards the East Coast. So millions of folks are going to be dealing with those very strong winds. This is a future forecast. It's going to show you those temperatures, those feel-like temperatures. And as we run through tonight and into early tomorrow morning, this is where you see the deepest, widest area where this cold air has really settled in. Tomorrow morning, North Texas, plenty of folks are going to be -5, -10 degrees. St. Louis, -25, -33 in Chicago. Just unbelievably cold air continues to settle. Still, actually, on Friday, not too cold if you live on the East Coast. But I will leave you finally with just the temperature drop there, because you're not going to avoid it entirely. This is Saturday, and if you live on the East Coast, yeah, suddenly it gets really cold Saturday morning for us too. So, Molly, kind of as you said, it's going to be hard to avoid this massive winter system.
A merry but very, very cold Christmas for a lot of folks out there. Need to remember that and get ready for it. Adam Klotz, very important information. Thanks for staying on top of it for us. Now to the scene at our southern border. Absolutely dire conditions as freezing temperatures there are starting to set in. Title 42 still in limbo. We are waiting for the Supreme Court to decide if that pandemic-era border policy can stay or if it has to end. And the measure has allowed the rapid expulsion of some 2.5 million illegal immigrants since March of 2020. If it is lifted, border towns that are already overwhelmed will be crushed with more than double the number of illegal immigrants crossing into the U.S. each day. Unbelievable images already coming in by the hour, showing just how bad it is. The question is, where is President Biden and what exactly is going to happen? What is he going to be doing about it? Republicans with some very strong opinions.
The law is the same. The difference is this administration is not enforcing the law. the Biden administration comes up with a plan. Let's make every town a border town. Let's make every state a border state. And let's take those that are illegally entering and let's shift them to other communities.
It is becoming harder and harder not to conclude that the border crisis is intentional. I mean, nobody is this incompetent, right?
Bill Malugin, as he so consistently is live at the border. He is in Eagle Pass, Texas today. Bill, to you.
And Molly, good morning to you. Temperatures expected to absolutely plummet here at the border, across the board over the next few days, but still these migrants are showing up in massive numbers every single day. Case in point, we'll start you off here in Eagle Pass this morning. Take a look at the thermal drone video our team shot just after sunrise this morning. Once again, like clockwork, another group of several hundred migrants crossing illegally into private property up here. We continue to see this every single morning. Largely Cubans, Colombians, and Nicaraguans crossing here. Those nationalities, for the most part, released after they are done being processed. Then we'll show you what happened here yesterday in Maverick County. Take a look at these wild images. Texas DPS and Border Patrol arresting a group of illegal immigrants from Honduras who were hitching a ride on a train, hiding themselves amongst cases of Corona beer. One of those migrants had a small little child with them. We've seen migrants do this before, hitch rides on these trains in an effort to get deeper into the United States, but that wasn't all. Take a look at these images. Another train, Texas DPS found illegal immigrants hiding inside of brand new vehicles that were left unlocked, and those vehicles are headed to car dealerships in the San Antonio area. And we've seen this before as well, where those migrants will get on the trains, get in the cars, and sit in those cars and just essentially hitch a ride all the way to San Antonio. Then we'll take you out to El Paso. Take a look at these wild images. These are illegal immigrant runners looking to evade after they've crossed illegally. They run across the main interstate there, I-10 in El Paso, and then they disappear off into residential neighborhoods. No Border Patrol around anywhere, making these people you see likely gotaways. Then we'll take you down to Nogales, Arizona. More fentanyl busts. Take a look at these images. CBP at the Nogales port of entry stopping a train that was coming in from Mexico. They open up a secret compartment. They find 736,000 fentanyl pills and 196 pounds of meth hidden inside of a rail car. That happened yesterday. Then the day before that, lastly, take a look at these images. Same location, Nogales port of entry. CBP officers stopping two separate smuggler vehicles and seizing over 300,000 fentanyl pills that were hidden underneath a car seat as well as hidden in a car's gas tank. So that single port of entry over the last 2 days, more than 1 million fentanyl pills seized in Nogales, Arizona. And back out here live, that ties into what the CDC just announced, announcing that in 2021, there were almost 107,000 overdose deaths in the United States, largely driven by fentanyl. Those numbers up 16% over 2020. We'll send it back to you.
Bill Malugin, as usual, showing us all the ramifications, tying things all together for us. We appreciate your reporting, especially this cold weather that we're going to see in the coming days. We have Brandon Judd joining us now. He's the National Border Control Council president. A big job you have working with people that have an absolutely enormous and stressful job. We've been talking a lot about Title 42, and we're waiting for that to ultimately shake out. But the numbers of migrants are already swelling on the other side of the border, this anticipation. I just want to get a sense, here we are a few days from Christmas, and your people are under enormous strain. Your thoughts on just these next couple days ahead?
Yeah, Molly, it's very disappointing to every single one of us as we go out there and try to patrol the border, try to protect this great nation. We just don't feel like we have the support of this administration. We know that all of their policies are encouraging everything that we're currently seeing. All of this this catastrophe that we're seeing, it's strictly based upon the policies. And if it wasn't for these policies, these people wouldn't be lining up in El Paso right now, risking their lives due to all of this this weather that we're seeing right now. Again, this administration does not care about life. It doesn't care about the law. It is clearly shown that, and the facts bear that out. Not the rhetoric, not what you hear from the White House press secretary. All of the facts clearly bear it out that this administration does not care about human life.
Yeah, you know, Bill Malugin just did a brilliant job showing us some of the disturbing pictures out of the Nogales port of entry. The meth the fentanyl that was seized there. But the DEA has released its 2022 report on just how much fentanyl it confiscated this year. 50 million pills and 10,000 pounds of powder. The agency estimates that represents nearly 380 million potentially deadly doses of the drug, enough to kill every American. Another grim stat, the CDC releasing the final tally for 2021, showing that 107,000 Americans died of drug overdoses last year. That number up 16% from 2020. Your thoughts on how this all ties together?
Well, what's scary about that is it all starts with illegal immigration. When you look at the explosion in illegal immigration, that's when all of the fentanyl started to hit our streets. When you go back to 2020, when we had the proper policies in place, we had the lowest number of opioids on our streets in my time in law enforcement. But now, as illegal immigration has been on the rise, that's when all of the drugs also come in. The cartels are very adept at what they do. They know that all they have to do is flood our resources with illegal border crossers, take Border Patrol agents out of the field, and that creates gaps in the coverage. And when they create those gaps, that's when they're able to get their drugs into the United States. Again, a very, very scary situation for the American people, and we have to ask, where is this administration? Why aren't they doing what's necessary to protect the lives of U.S. citizens? It's not just adults that are dying because of this opioid epidemic. It's our children that are also dying, and yet we don't see anything from President Biden.
Americans are starting to get fed up with the border crisis. This is an issue we know Americans care about. A Biden voter from South Texas says that this could be his last straw before saying, goodbye to voting Democrat.
And it should be. It should be. When you look at, again, it's not just about border security. This is about the safety and security of the American people. If we don't have that, why would you vote for President Biden?
One of the things we're looking at here as we're watching this unfold, and Congress is working and talking about Title 42 and what they're ultimately going to decide, and there are people on both sides of the aisle that would like to see this extended. Well, there's some sort of work done towards ending this crisis. Do you think, as we round into a new year, that something specific can be done to address this? When we just heard a slew of Republicans talking about how they feel the strategy thus far has been an intentional one.
I just don't see any solution right now. I don't see that there's the political will that exists to have Democrats and Republicans come together. When you look at this, it's constantly Democrats that are saying that they're not going to do what's necessary to give us the measures to put the proper policies in place to stop this. Again, we have to look at, is this about the safety and security of the American people, or is this about politics? Is this about the safety and security of the immigrants that are actually dying when they enter the deserts of Arizona or across the river, into Texas? Again, it clearly shows that they do not care about life. It clearly shows that they don't care about the American people.
Brandon Judd, Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas to you and all of our Border Patrol agents, and also wishing you a very happy new year. I'm optimistic. I hope that for the Border Patrol agents that 2023 is a better year. But thank you for joining us today.
Thank you,
we
Molly.
appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Too many gaffes to count. A look back at the president's fibs and some of the tall tales over the past years as voters, even some hardcore Democrats, sour on another potential Biden term. And the FBI is firing back over this latest batch of Twitter files.
There's going to be a lot of questions for the FBI. What we need to make sure is that the government is not going through things, helping Twitter, Facebook, or anybody else.
Following this latest batch of Twitter files, writing them off as the work of, quote, conspiracy theorists, the Bureau insisting that its actions were nothing out of the ordinary and that they reimbursed Twitter for standard legal requests. Critics say the reported $3.5 million spent was used to suppress information, including the New York Post reporting on Hunter Biden's laptop. The FBI says it did not provide Twitter, quote, any specific instruction or details regarding the Hunter Biden laptop story. Now, some quick to the point, it's a little wiggle room here in that statement. It was not a blanket denial of conversations with Twitter about Hunter. The FBI says, quote, it is unfortunate that conspiracy theorists and others are feeding the American public misinformation with the sole purpose of attempting to discredit the agency. Kellyanne Conway says Americans should be worried.
To have our chief law enforcement officers, up to 80 FBI agents in one report, routinely saying to Twitter, you have to look at this tweet, you have to look at that person's postings. While we're in an election season, this is frightening to me as an American citizen to think that this is going on under the guise of some official operation. They're sitting on the scales of free speech. They're sitting on the scales of justice.
As promised, we have Brian Kilmeade, co-host of Fox and Friends and host of One Nation with Brian Kilmeade, simulcasting live with us from his radio studio. Brian, thank you so much for joining me. Merry Christmas. I'm excited to get a chance to chat with you about this. You work all day long, morning, noon, almost noon, night.
Right, and now we're sharing networks, sharing audiences. Molly, always great to see you. Great to see you in New York. I was waiting for the FBI pushback, but I thought it would be more professional. I thought it would be like one would think, and somewhat limited. But it's an aggressive pushback and naming people that have a problem with their action as conspiracy theorists. That sounds like something I would see on MSNBC or on CNN with every single host.
What are they so worried about?
Yeah, I think that's that's what I was shocked at. I thought it was going to be an ex-FBI agent blasted back, but I didn't know it was the actual FBI. But let me just say, from what you just said on the intro, this is how it's counteracted. Not only did I think the FBI was over his skis, was I stunned that they were doing this. Matt Taibbi feels the same way, who was able to disseminate and publish all this stuff. Michael Schellenberger the same way. And also the other guy named Yoel Roth, who they're talking about. Was he the one who said if he didn't feel as though the FBI was breathing down his neck, telling him what to do, and getting his antenna up for would-be Hunter Biden? Listen to what he said under oath. They learned in the meetings that there were rumors of a hack and leak operation that would involve Hunter Biden. Excuse me. That is Yoel Roth, the vice president of Twitter. And meanwhile, they're saying, the FBI is saying, we're gaslighting with the conspiracy theorists by listening to a liberal executive at Twitter who was directly interacting with the FBI. So they said that he understood that this Hunter Biden thing was coming down the line. And Elvis Chan is somebody who feels he's been unjustly called out. But Elvis Chan, I have news for you. Roth says that you guys brought up the Hunter Biden laptop. So when it came out, they were ready for something that looked exactly like you were wargaming with them in the tabletop exercises at the Aspen Institute with the New York Times, Washington Post, and all these other outlets. And I'll bring something else into play. Not only is the Hunter Biden laptop a player in Twitter, Mark Zuckerberg told the same thing to Joe Rogan. We were told by the FBI that something exactly like this was coming down the line. So if the FBI is mad at us, it's because it's been exposed.
Yeah, these are fair questions about free speech on these platforms that Americans are participating in, and you certainly don't need to act like people are nuts because they're asking the questions. Something else I want to talk to you about. Former MSNBC anchor Keith Olbermann had this advice that he brought up for House Democrats, urging them to fight back against Republicans when they officially take back the House in January, and he means fight. Take a listen.
I wish the Democrats would play that game to 10% of the levels that the Republicans do until the Democrats stop rolling over for this and saying, well, we're not going to dirty our hands. When they go high, we go low. So when they go low, we get baseball bats. That should be the next, big, let's get Obama out there saying, when they go low, we get baseball bats. I think that would solve this completely.
I don't know how devoted his following is, but I'm hoping that no one actually goes out and grabs baseball bats.
Maxine Waters will be proud. Go after them wherever they go in their stores, wherever they follow them. And guess what? That was happening with Sarah Huckabee Sanders and all the other players during the Trump era, wherever they won. So what is going to be happening now is people are going to come out of the woodwork and feel as though they got to go and try to marginalize the Republican majority in the House. They're going to be big players once they pick Kevin McCarthy as Speaker, and I hope indeed they do. But Molly, I just got to warn you about pretending that Keith Olbermann's relevant. The only thing consistent with Keith Olbermann is the word former, because everywhere he gets hired, he gets fired. So he's former ESPN, former MSNBC, and he leaves angry, and he sits in his apartment, and he tweets things that are totally inappropriate. So I just warn you against making Keith Olbermann relevant. But I do think that if the 5 people that follow him that if they're going to grab bats, he should be personally responsible.
And why watch Oberman when you can watch Brian Kilmeade now, later today, into the evening? Thank you so much, Brian. We appreciate you joining us. Thank you.
Go get him, Molly. Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it. As we share audiences.
Outrage as mask mandates are making a comeback in some schools.
They're literally trying to kill a generation of kids, figuratively kill them. Think about what it means to
think this time, so hopefully we'll be good. The weather looked not great. Great for a white Christmas, not good for travel.
Millions of Americans are facing a holiday travel nightmare this week. Dangerous winter weather and stunningly cold temperatures are hitting nearly every state, affecting hundreds of millions of people. The National Weather Service is calling this a once-in-a-generation winter storm. Now, major airlines and travelers are in a world of hurt already. Hundreds of flights from coast to coast canceled or delayed ahead of the chaos that is still yet to come. Mike Tobin is live in Chicago with the very latest on this as it is just beginning to unfold. Mike, to you.
And at least here at O'Hare right now, Molly, the big pileup hasn't really happened. It got busy this morning, but the fact is the airlines saw this coming and they were able to email their customers and travelers ahead of time, letting them know that their flights had been canceled. So you have people who just aren't showing up at the airport thus far, despite the fact that if you look at just the domestic cancellations, you've got more than 1,600 flights that have been canceled thus far. Running down the major air carriers, looking at their cancellations, American Airlines, 89 flights have been canceled. Delta, 113. Southwest is really taking it hard. 692 flights have been canceled thus far. United is looking at 112. As far as the people who are making it through the airport, these are the people who are hoping to slip under the wire, or the people who are already out and they've got to get home one way or another.
Over the next couple of days, we'll be kind of checking out the weather and seeing what's happening at the airports. And also, I mean, it is the holidays, and even being delayed, let's say a day or so, is a big deal if you're supposed to get home on the 22nd and suddenly it's the 23rd or 24th. So, you know, fingers crossed that the weather doesn't impact everyone as much as it might, depending on what happens over the next 48 hours.
I'm just saying, stand in this line, stand in that line, and for standing in the line, we missed our flight to begin with.
Coming here, I got earlier, but right now I just saw my flight got delayed to Orlando. Just probably like an hour later than it should be, but it's okay. Anything after that, I get a little upset, but I'm okay with an hour.
FlightAware.com puts out what they call their misery map. If you look at the misery map, the red from that, where we're looking at the domestic flight cancellations, I mentioned that a minute ago, 1,600 flights domestically have been canceled. If we look at that misery map, the one thing it'll tell us is that Denver, Minneapolis, St. Paul are getting it the worst so far. Here in Chicago, the weather hasn't turned that bad. It's not too cold, and even when the bad weather comes in, we'll start to get flurries here in the next hour, according to the forecast. But even when the weather turns, when you're talking about 2 to 4 inches or 5 to 7 inches here in Chicago, that's something that the crews out here can handle. The complicating factor will be the bitter cold and the wind when it comes through. And I can tell you one thing, looking at the barometer, it fell some 14 millibars overnight. And one thing for the non-weather geeks out there, when the barometer is going down, that means bad weather is on the way. Molly,
I know you know how to handle that cold weather, but folks out there, man, I'm looking. You talk about barometers. The temperatures take a dive today. It's going to be in the single digits by like 6 o'clock this evening out there. It is going to be frosty. Thank you so much, Mike, for keeping on top of the travel for us. We appreciate it. Mandatory masks making a comeback. Critics, some are very outraged. A New Jersey school district, sending a letter to parents this week. The Passaic Public Schools now ordering face coverings for employees, students, and visitors. The district citing CDC numbers reporting high community levels of COVID in 10 of the state's counties there. The move sparking a lot of backlash. One critic, with 2 weeks to slow the spread, has turned into 2.75 years to flatten a generation. Another writing this. This is anti-science, anti-child, and just plain cruel. We have Fox Nation's David Webb. Kids just can't take it anymore.
Think about what it means to develop in school. Think about what it means to really learn to adjust to others, social development. What they've done in New Jersey is taken 2.5 weeks to slow the spread into almost 3 years to literally slow down a generation of kids. They're not learning. They're not advancing.
There is more. New Jersey's Camden City Schools and Philadelphia City Schools also bringing those mandates back into effect in January. New York City and New York State now recommending masks indoors. Jason Rantz, who is a Seattle radio show host, joining me now to talk a little bit about this. Jason, your thoughts on this as we're heading into this holiday season and looking at potential masks coming back in January?
It's ludicrous, it's not based in science, and it's not going to work. And it seems odd to me that no one seems to step back and say maybe the fact that for 2.5 years some folks kept that mask on, kept people inside, not having any relationship with the outside world, might actually be bad for them, not just emotionally, but to their immune system. It is the flu season. Guess what? The flu happens during the flu season. COVID is not going to go anywhere. So we have to be a little bit smarter with how we approach these things moving forward. And the fact of the matter is, throwing into this fear-mongering of it's a triple-demic and we better mask up, it doesn't actually do anything. I would argue that it makes it worse because you're not introducing anything into your immune system the way that we used to. When it comes to kids in particular, we know that the risks of being in a mask and getting out, sort of away from the relationships that you used to have, being able to see the person that you're talking to, we know that that is way worse than what COVID will do to the average kid. And no one seems to have learned anything over the course of the last 2.5 years.
Yeah, it's interesting to see some school districts doing this, others not. Switching topics a little bit, recent polls show a majority of Americans and even a majority of Democrats are looking ahead to 2024 and they don't want President Biden to run again. Look at this poll. Among Democrats, and this is Dem-leaning independents as well, 78% want someone other than Biden. Now, many are expressing concerns about his age, about potential mental fitness, and we have seen a lot of gaffes, cringy moments throughout his presidency. The New York Post is out with a quote, "Year in Biden lies. How well do you know the falsehoods of our fibber-in-chief?" Very critical. Among Biden's biggest whoppers, his claim that he was arrested trying to see Nelson Mandela and sneaking into an all-girls dorm, his telltale of being a big rig driver, saying he was politically raised by Puerto Ricans, and this last one, this one really for the birds, the president saying that Delaware has the most chickens of any state, but no turkeys.
I mean, where do you start with that? It's really interesting because when you go over just the last couple of years, and this year in particular, I mean, there were gaffes and there were lies. There were political stories that he tells because he thinks it comes off as really folksy and down to earth and people will identify with. And you kind of give him a little bit of a pass, but at the same time, it plays into this idea that he's just really, really old and doesn't have a grasp of what's going on. Then, of course, you have the political lies. And I think that sometimes they get sort of written off as gaffes, including in some of the articles that I've read just over the course of last week going over this year. Like when you tell us that the border is secure, that's not a gaffe. That is a flat out lie. That is gaslighting. There is political intent behind that. For me, though, just trying to reflect on all the gaffes, the "where's Jackie" moment I thought was so disturbing on so many levels and just frankly sad. And I do think that for a lot of people, that was the moment on the left where they said, maybe it's time to move on.
You remember how virulent those fact checkers were just a few years ago?
Where are they now?
Here's something else. This is, of course, President Biden welcoming Volodymyr Zelensky, Ukraine leader, to the White House yesterday before he went on to speak before Congress. But take a listen. He had this interaction with President Zelensky in the Oval Office yesterday.
By the way, we have a famous thing that occurs once a year. We pick the Man of the Year in Time magazine. You are the Man of the Year in the United States of America.
I believe he was trying to pay a compliment, but just your thoughts on that back and forth.
It just seems every time he's in a position like this, he screws it up, where he gives reason for people to doubt his fitness, where it gives reason for people to wonder whether or not he's actually leading this country or if there are people behind him who are making these decisions and just putting him out there to do some of the frivolous back and forth. It's just sad. At some point, you do have to step back and say, this is a human being here who very clearly is not fit for office, and it just seems cruel to keep him in these positions.
Well, the voters are going to start thinking about that a lot in the new year, as then will be, the election season will kick off before we know it. Jason Rantz, thank you so much for joining us. I love your tie. Merry Christmas.
Thank you. Merry Christmas, Molly.
The Senate is on the floor right now. They're working to pass this absolutely massive spending bill, nearly $2 trillion. Republicans with a pretty big beef over what they say is just loads and loads of pork packed in there. We'll put it all right out there on the table. There are a lot of folks. It's, of course, a play. Let's give credit where credit is due. That sounded an awful lot like 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, right? Mark, your thoughts on Rand Paul there?
No, I mean, obviously he's making light of a very serious situation, and you do have to wonder how Republicans can stomach this. I mean, it is just so bad. And I know that Democrats like to point to things like Ukraine, but let's think about this for a minute. When this passes today, the U.S. will spend over $100 billion on Ukraine. That is nearly double what the entire world combined has contributed to Ukraine. It's time for our allies and friends to start stepping up and doing more to protect people in their own backyard than just relying on the U.S. welfare bank which is what we've become.
Scott, I feel like you kind of shifted topics there. I don't feel like Ukraine and pork are really in the same pocket, of course, really, and particularly when we come to the amount of money. But your thoughts as we're looking into January here, when we start to reflect on some of this pork after the vote has already happened.
Well, it's certainly a big bill. I think Rand Paul and my colleague make some good points here. We need to take another look at what our appropriations are, how much we're appropriating to foreign governments. I certainly know Ukraine's issues, and certainly we want to support them. It's an important issue. But we do have a lot of internal issues here in the U.S. for people of color, people who are poor and disenfranchised, and poverty itself. And so I would hope that both sides would take a deeper and closer look at that, because I think my colleagues on the other side are correct to some extent. Both sides need to do a better job at it. We have got just 1 second left for a quick other topic. Florida Democrats crossing the aisle. A new report is calling them DeSantis Democrats, saying their support of this conservative GOP government